Hi everyone, I'm Anna,
And I'm Jeff.
and you're listening to We Judge a Show by its Pilot, a podcast where we do exactly what the title says. On today's episode, we're judging the pilot of one of the top shows of all time.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our pod.
Hi, welcome back.
So, Anna, you feeling fancy?
I'm feeling fancy.
You feeling like you could just want to get on a plane and just go somewhere for, on a whim?
Yes,
Your
let's
own,
do
our,
it.
our own private jet,
Yes,
obviously.
if we had our
Yeah.
own private jet.
What would our private jet line be called? What would we call it?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. So if we had to name our plane?
Yeah, so if we were super mega rich and we had our own jet or our own ship, what would be a fun one?
I don't know.
I think we would have to be silly, and we would just have to because we call each other Boo.
Yeah.
Have to be like our like Boo plane,
Our Boo plane.
Boo plane, Boo
Yeah.
ship.
Boo ship. Yeah.
It's our line of Boo.
Yeah. There you go.
All right. So today, if you can't tell, we're being a little silly, but if you can't tell, we are doing a top show today. Although, even though it is a top show, this is also one of your favorite shows. What was that when you were in middle school, high school?
Yes, middle school.
We are talking about Dynasty.
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 The OG Dynasty.
Yes. All right, so I watched old reruns of Dynasty growing, because, I didn't know what was going on. I had no idea what was going on. It was just very dramatic, and it was kind of over the top. Not kind of, it was very over the top.
Yes.
And that was always the appeal. So you watched this when it originally aired.
Yes, definitely.
Was it like a sit down like family event, or was it
I'm not gonna
an
say
Anna event?
Sit down. I will definitely say it was probably more me.
Okay.
Because my mom probably didn't get into this kind of stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
she maybe watched Dallas in the day a little bit, but not really
Right.
Dynasty. My sister was in high school. She was a senior the
Okay.
year that it released, and then my brother was gone and out of the house, and my
Okay.
dad certainly never would have watched it. This
Gotcha.
was definitely an Anna, like, I thought it was fancy.
Oh,
I
yeah.
thought they were rich people. They wore pretty clothes,
Oh, yeah.
all of the things, and yeah, I watched it regularly.
Well, we're going to be talking about all the fashion, all the feelings that Anna went through while watching the show. But before we do that, let's go over some episode information just to tell y'all, just in case you've never seen Dynasty. Anna will tell you a little bit about it. So take it away.
All right, Dynasty. The pilot premiered on January 12th, 1981.
So that is 2 days before my sister was born.
Shout out to Sarah.
Shout out to my sister. So let's pretend while we're doing this that my mom was 11 months and 28 days or 9
months?
Wow, I just did you're pregnant for a year. I meant to say 9 months. I meant to say 9 months and
Don't
28
scare
8
her.
months and 28 days. It's sorry y'all. I
Did
just
she
got off
not
work.
want Sarah to come out?
I'm sorry y'all. I just got home and got off work. I'm a little out of it.
He's a little loopy.
I meant to say 8 months and 28 days. So let's pretend that my mom was preggo and she was watching this. She probably wasn't, but you never know.
You never know.
You never
Gina,
know. Maybe
were
I'll
you
ask her.
watching
Maybe I'll ask her.
Dynasty? She might have.
All right, sorry.
All right.
Continue.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
After we recalculated pregnancy terms.
Yeah, turns out.
The pilot was played as a full-length movie when it originally aired, coming in at just over 2 hours. And then when it launched into syndication, the pilot was split into 3 parts. It ran on ABC from 1981 to 1989 for 9 seasons, with a total of 222 episodes. 222.
222.
Dynasty was originally conceived by ABC to compete with CBS's Dallas.
Ewan.
Yep, Ewan Oil. All right. The series was created by Richard and Esther Shapiro, who were a married couple. They had already written episodes for shows like Bonanza, and they also co-wrote the Dynasty pilot. The pilot was directed by Ralph Sinensky, a seasoned TV director who wrote episodes for shows such as Heart to Heart, The Waltons, The Courtship of Eddie's Father.
I think that's the second Waltons and Courtship of Eddie's Father we've had.
Yeah. So I guess these directors were definitely kind of
in the rotation.
On the studio lots, kind of moving from show to show. But he also directed an episode of Twilight Zone, which is a favorite of Jeff's.
Yeah, Printer's Devil. It's
With
yeah.
Burgess Meredith.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Oh, such a good episode.
Okay. Aaron Spelling was an executive producer.
That's very interesting. Did not know that.
And the series follows the Carrington and the Colby families, two wealthy oil families, feuding over their fortune and their children. Okay, that sounds more like Dallas, not Dynasty.
You sound like Blanche Devereaux from the Golden Girls.
Oh, okay. That'll be another show for another day. I'll bring that back.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Classic.
And so it is a little bit difficult to find online.
Yes.
It is on Pluto TV.
So it's like the Dynasty channel they have on Pluto TV.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You can also purchase episodes on Prime.
Which is what we did. We're not necessarily recommending that you go do that, but each episode it was like $2 or something like that.
Yeah. And Dynasty, there was actually a remake of it on the CW in 2017 that lasted for 5 seasons and for over 100 episodes. And that version of Dynasty is available on Netflix.
That's what was really confusing when I was looking up where to stream the original Dynasty. It kept taking me to Netflix, and I was just like, no, this is the remake. But yeah, just letting y'all know if y'all go look it up.
So just one important thing to note, and we'll probably talk a little bit about this as you're asking me questions and things, is that probably the most iconic character of the show was Alexis Carrington, played by the gorgeous Joan Collins.
That's what I was talking about when I said eye candy.
And she didn't appear on the show until season 2. And in the reboot series, they introduce Alexis in season 1, knowing that, she's the character everyone wants to see.
Yeah, Nicolette Sheridan played her in the reboot, and then she was replaced by Elaine Hendricks.
Oh, okay, because yes, from Parent Trap.
Oh, I've seen clips, and like Nicolette Sheridan's just kind of being Nicolette Sheridan, but Elaine Hendricks is like such a great villain. So,
she's always a great villain. Yeah, so I was looking up some of the fashion and stuff, and I kept seeing the Nicolette Sheridan, and I missed the Dynasty reboot remake.
I didn't.
So
apparently it's very similar. Don't quote me on that, fans of the remake, but I from what I've gathered, it's pretty similar. Pretty similar storylines.
All right. So why did we pick this as one of the top shows?
Well, just to be very literal, it's our top show because it was the #1 show in the 1984-1985 season on primetime. Even though it was created to compete with Dallas, it never quite, ratings-wise, like topped Dallas. Dallas was just such a I don't know. I didn't watch Dallas, so I mean, like, it was just such a big thing that like just Dynasty tried to be more popular than it, and it just, I guess it was already going. I guess it had already been going for like 2 or 3 seasons, and
maybe we'll do Dallas one day because they also had a reboot, which I did actually watch the reboot of Dallas.
Just about every show from the 70s and 80s that we're talking about had a reboot at some point.
Oh yeah. And so
in some way,
I will say, and this is again vague in my memory of, I probably can guess why. I do think Dynasty was always playing catch up to Dallas.
Yeah.
Because like Dallas introduced some of like the great kind of TV tropes of today, like the whole like who shot JR, and it was like a whole mystery.
The whole
over the hiatus.
Bait and switch with the dream
and
twist.
Then they introduced the whole dream sequence with Bobby coming back to life after he had left the show.
That's really the only thing about Dallas that I know.
Yeah, so, I feel like they always had a little something, and then Dynasty was always playing catch up with it.
Right. So they had a slow start because it was like their first season, they didn't even make the top 20. And then it was kind of like, then they were number 5, then they were number 3, then they were finally number 1 again. But the second half of the 80s, and once you kind of look at all of it, you kind of see it. The second half of the 80s was all about family sitcoms. So the whole family drama thing, even though shows like Dallas and Falcon Crest were still doing well in the ratings, it was shows like The Cosby Show, Roseanne, Family Ties, Growing Pains that just like completely took over the second half of the 80s. It was all about family comedies. Even though Family Ties is kind of a bummer of a show, it's still considered a comedy.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so that's kind of, well, we picked it for a top show because of that, but also we kind of wanted to double this because I know how much you loved the show.
Oh yeah.
We've talked about it many times. We originally were going to do this as one of your favorite shows, but it just fits so well with this month's theme that I was just like, we got to do it. And also, I really wanted to watch the pilot just because this show is so famously insane and over the top that like I just wanted to get my first little taste of it.
A little taste of Dynasty.
Yeah. All right, so yes, this was one of your favorite shows. We keep saying it. This was one of your favorite shows growing up. Do you remember like the first time you watched it, or do you remember like one of the early years, like the early, one of the early episodes? Sorry.
So I was around 11, 12 ish.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say like I totally remember the night I watched
moment,
it.
Yeah.
But I definitely remember watching it
Right.
because again, it was just kind of another show to kind of layer on top of Dallas into the weekly viewing. And mind you, I have mentioned this before, we really only had 4 channels.
Right.
And this was on the cusp. So I do wonder, like, if this had anything to do with it. We got cable around 1981.
Okay.
So that could have played into ratings and stuff. Although, on cable back then, there wasn't like a lot of new, like, original content and stuff. We were watching like news and MTV and stuff like that.
We've talked about that before. Yeah.
So,
cable was just,
Again, so I will say, though, that I think diverted a lot of viewership of network TV. But that being said, I remember, like, sort of seeing the mansion in Denver. The opening is iconic. The music is very iconic and again, very similar to Dallas, in that sense that you hear that kind of rolling kind of thunder of Dallas. This one has like kind of like the tinkling music and I don't know the exact kind of wording for it, but it sounds very pretty. Like I feel like it
sounds very like elegant.
Yeah, it sounds very elegant, very fancy. And so I do, you just totally remember that the opening credits each year to see all, the stars and all of that. So I do remember watching it. That being said, and when we talk about the pilot in just a minute, like my 11, 12-year-old mind really just had no concept of really what was happening.
Right.
So I was really watching it because it was just probably a new TV show and I liked it. I thought it was, I can watch people in mansions and, fighting over whatever.
So that's like what drew you in was kind of the whole like kind of
rich I had, I'm
money.
From the South, New Orleans. I had never been to Denver, Colorado in my life. So it was just a new place for me to imagine being.
Yeah.
And so that to me again was just interesting.
So if you were a billionaire, where would your like main mansion be? Like where would we, hopefully I'm there with you. Where I'm sure, our mansions could be on the same property. Where would you want to like mostly be at? 'Cause I know if we were like super rich, we would probably not be home that often because we'd be traveling a lot. But
correct, on our boo boat.
Yes, on our boo. Oh man, I forgot about Boo Line.
Our boo lines. Okay. I don't know. Like, okay, so there's kind of an issue with the first part of that question because really I'm not a huge mansion person.
Right.
I'm, again, as you know, very logical and pragmatic, and I also hate cleaning. And I know if I was a millionaire, I could hire maids and staff to do my cleaning.
Yes.
But again, I probably wouldn't want to do that. So, because I also like to clean at times when I'm stressed out. So it's a very confusing situation.
Where would our practically sized house be located? Because we've already agreed that like if we won the lottery, because that's the only way we're gonna become billionaires. If we ever won the lottery or like lucked out in some way, we would have to move. So, because we don't want people coming after us. So
I will actually go ahead and say I would consider moving back to Seattle.
Oh yeah.
And living on Lake Washington.
I am already there with you. I was hoping.
I have a friend, she from high school. If she's listening, maybe shout out to her. I don't want to say her name. She has a house on Lake Washington. It is so beautiful. I love it. I, see her Instagram
Did you ever
pictures.
take me to Lake Washington?
We probably passed
drove
it at
past
some
it? Okay,
point.
I don't
Yeah, oh
remember.
yeah, we for sure did.
Okay.
Bill Gates has his big house on, in Medina in Seattle, but
Gotcha.
it's not why. It's beautiful. I love the weather in Seattle.
Same.
It's cloudy. It gets cool. Like you don't even really ever need air conditioning in
Yeah.
Seattle, so there are no bugs in Seattle. It doesn't snow that often. It does snow maybe once or twice every other year, so the weather to me is really great.
I love it there.
And it's a major city, and we could easily hop on over to like Vancouver or Victoria, hop over to Alaska to our Alaska house.
Oh, right. We have our Alaska house and our
and then, go over
our Virgin Islands house.
to Asia or to Australia if we wanted to, and, hop on over wherever we want. So I love Seattle for a lot of things.
It's also a good, and also if we're thinking practically, it's a very, like you just said, it's a very good like central location. And also, you can fly out of Seattle pretty easily to go to other places. That's a good one.
Exactly.
I'm gonna say Seattle too.
Okay.
So we just talked about Dallas a second ago. So did you watch both of the shows or did you?
Yeah,
Okay,
definitely.
And you preferred Dynasty over Dallas? Like if you had to choose?
Yes, I think my 11-year-old self did.
Do you think it was because like? So I've never watched Dallas. I only have to go off of like images that I've seen and pictures that I've seen. But like Dynasty was a lot more like glamorous, and Dallas was a lot more like
farm
70s.
ranch.
Yeah.
It was something that I knew. I mean, not that like I lived on a ranch or anything, but that's very southern. Farming. Living with cattle and all of that. Oil derricks, if you're driving in Texas, you can see them off the highway. Dynasty to me just seemed more glamorous. Their house was really a mansion where, I'm not going to like diss on South Fork because South Fork is pretty nice, but it really looks just like a big house. And again, not dissing on South Fork. I'm sure it's amazing. I think they have tours and stuff. But again, it just to me looked like, actually kind of a lot of houses around here in Louisiana. I mean, they just also had, cattle and farming on it and a swimming pool, which I thought was fancy.
Right.
But Dynasty, I mean, they had like the driveway up from like the street.
It was a property.
Yeah. And then, the big mega columns and red bricks and
it was like its own
marble
universe.
hallways. And it was just, they had the limo driver, that was hanging out on the property, the horses and the stables. So it was all like a compound versus like, it just kind of looked like a big house attached to a farm.
Right.
And again, not to sing on South Fork people. It's an amazing historical, famous house.
So I know that we did not grow up in this type of universe, so I guess it's hard to ask if there was a character that you related to, but was there a character that like you favored? Or maybe that you relate to? I don't know. Maybe you did relate to it. I don't know.
No, I'm not going to say I related to any of them. Not really, because it was definitely, I think, a higher level. Like, all the kids were older. Like, they were all adult. Like, Fallon and Steven and...
I guess maybe Linda Evans was supposed to be, like, the relatable character. Because she was supposed to be,
that.
like... I guess because she was supposed to be, like, the norm... She was supposed to have come from a modest
the blue-collar worker, secretary.
That's what I meant,
yeah. So, maybe, but no, not really. Because I thought...
That way.
No, because one, I mean, in the introduction of the show, she's already getting married to Blake Harrington.
Right.
She's leaving the secretarial
pool. She's already
pool
marrying into money.
And she's leaving all her friends.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of sad that she is already lonely and she hasn't even gotten married yet. I mean, that's like a whole nother issue to discuss. But, I mean, no, I'm definitely not really. No, I can't think of a character right off in the pilot that I felt like as a kid going like, oh my gosh. I will say though that Pamela Sue Martin, who plays Fallon, the daughter, I knew her from Nancy Drew. So I could relate to her in the sense that I already knew who she was.
Right.
I mean, kind of all the actors were much older, seasoned actors. John Forsythe, who we knew as the voice of Charlie from Charlie's Angels,
Right.
Joan Collins, Linda
Evans,
Evans, Bo
yeah.
Hopkins. I mean, they had been in, I think, lots of kind of other movies
Mm-hmm.
and, not much that I had really seen. So I will say Pamela Sue Martin as Fallon was probably the character that I was most interested in because I knew who she was from Nancy Drew Mysteries.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So Dynasty is all about you got the heroes, the good guys, and you got the villains. Who are you rooting for? Heroes or villains?
The villains.
I knew you were gonna say that.
Yeah.
So a fun fact about Anna is yes, like you just said, you're usually more intrigued by the villains, despite being one of the most horrible. And we'll be doing Game of Thrones one day soon.
Oh yeah.
and even though he is one of the most despicable villains in TV history,
Oh yeah.
you had a little crush on Ramsay Bolton.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I'll say this, and maybe you'll put it on the Insta. Like, you very much favor him. You've had people actually ask, like.
So when I used to wait tables, I had never watched Game of Thrones. I'd watched a little bit of Game of Thrones, but I never got into it. I only watched the first season at this point in time. And there was this couple that I was waiting on. I used to work at a pizza place, and they just like looked at me like, you look really familiar. And I'm like, when you wait tables, you kind of hear that a lot. So you're just like, okay, I don't know you. So they're just like, you look like Ramsay Bolton. And I'm just like, I don't know who that is. There's like, he's from Game of Thrones. And so I went and looked him up. And the guy that plays him, I actually I love another show that he was on before Game of Thrones called Misfits. So I'm taking this as like a huge compliment because I loved him on Misfits. And then I looked up his character on Game of Thrones, and I'm just like, that's not a very nice thing to say. He's awful.
He's terrible.
But I do look a lot like him. In fact, as soon as I say, people say I look like Ramsay Bolton, people just, something clicks in people's brains. They're like, oh my God, you do. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Like,
and what's kind of funny is just a couple of little trivias about that. Like, about a year before I met you,
almost to the day.
Almost a year to the day, I had posted on the Facebook, that I detest Ramsay Bolton, but I secretly wanted him.
No, you posted that the same day that I posted that the couple told me that I looked like Ramsay Bolton.
Yeah.
We posted that on the same day, almost a year before we met.
Yeah, it was crazy.
It was pretty insane.
That was insane. Yeah.
That's what it was. I was trying to remember. I was like, no, it was something crazier than that. Like, we posted something. It was either on the same day or it was within like a few days of each other.
Yeah, it was really close. And then when we played Who Memed It or What's the Meme, like, you got the Ramsay Bolton card. I have a picture of you with his little meme card, and you actually like have your kind of little fluffy hair, your mustache, your beard, and so you very much favor Ramsay Bolton.
Me, Ramsay, and Elijah Wood, we can be on Three Identical Strangers.
Yes. So, I mean, yeah, I just love a villain. I think it's because you can get lost in the character because generally I think I have a very good moral code. I mean, I'm, not going to go out murdering and stealing and lying to people. That's kind of not who I am, but I think as a villain, and I would guess particularly as an actor, I think it's probably like delicious to play a villain. It's probably just fun, and you can really lose yourself. And I think that's kind of why I think watching a villain is great. I mean, just quickly talking about Ramsay Bolton, he was terrible, but he was amazing.
Oh yeah,
that actor was great.
Yeah, I can never pronounce his name, but
you just really wanted to hate him. I mean, you did. But it was great.
And yeah, I won't. We won't delve
we'll do
too
Game
much
of
into
Thrones
that
another day
because we can talk about Game of Thrones all day long.
Yes.
But yeah, I always kind of am more intrigued by the villains because even though I don't think that way, it's always interesting because there are times where I don't agree with their practice, but I understand why they are the way they are and what their motives are. Because a lot of times their motives are from good intentions. They just kind of get warped into this like villainous attitude.
Yes.
All right, so Dynasty, other than the huge cat fights that they used to have, and the
All
people
the ladies
people
always
strangling each
fighting.
other and dunking heads into
I will
pools, and
also say that was part of the intrigue of Dynasty to me. I really do feel that it was very female
oh
forward.
yeah,
I mean, you had
I got
Linda
that vibe.
Evans, Joan Collins, Diane Carroll, Pamela Sue Martin, Emma Samms, Heather
Heather
Locklear.
Locklear.
I
Yep,
mean, it was a very female
it
centric
was.
show. A lot of the villain and good gal stuff were the women. I mean, I really kind of feel like Blake Carrington and some of his dealings with the
Yeah.
Colbys were secondary.
Right. Well, that's what's so funny because like when it comes to Dynasty, even though I didn't watch a lot of it, when if you were to tell me name three actors from Dynasty, it would be women just because like
Yeah.
I wouldn't even think about Blake Carrington. Like I would be like, oh no, it's Heather Locklear, it's Joan Collins, it's Linda Evans, and it's Pamela Sue Martin.
Pamela Sue Martin.
I always want to call her Fallon. All right. Was
Yeah.
there like a so yeah, because of the fashion, people remember the fights, but there was also the fashion. People
Yes.
always remember the fashion. Was there like a character that you loved with it? Was there like an outfit that you remember loving or a character that you were
Well,
always like wanting to see what they were gonna wear?
yes, yes. I
Yeah.
mean, not so much like I'm tuning in this week to see
Right.
the
I know you're not. I
fashion.
know you're not like a fashion guru or
Yes,
anything, but
but I
it's
will
part of the
definitely
appeal.
say it was the period of the 80s where you had like the the formal gowns that were like
hmm
totally beaded and like kind of heavy on you. I'm sure if there are any pageant women that competed in pageants in the 80s know what I'm talking about. But I think the thing to me that's definitely most iconic are kind of the hats and the suits
Oh
that
yeah,
like Joan Collins would wear and the shoulder pads.
the shoulder pads.
Um, I mean, Joan Collins, I think I maybe talked about this um, another time, but it was like she wore the hats that were just kind of wide brimmed. And I
hmm
mean, like she was inside. You were like, why are you wearing this hat? You're not like at church or going to a
Like
tea
I was
party
about to
or
say
something. But
like a Kentucky Derby
yeah,
hat.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But they were also very like bold colors,
hmm
which definitely went with her character. Um, to me, like Crystal Carrington, the good girl, she definitely wore more kind of like flowing, soft, subtle. Like they were bold colors, but
Yeah.
definitely like silks and more softer, demure type things. Where Joan Collins was definitely in like the power colors, the power
Yeah.
suit. She made an entrance and you saw her first because of the
hmm
fashion. At least that's my memory of it.
Yeah.
And so I love a hat. I mean, back in the 80s and, college, I loved wearing like little bolero hats out to the clubs
My
and
boo. So
I
cute.
love the crayon colors to
Oh yeah.
wear. I love a royal blue, red, black, very, just stick to the crayon box colors of clothes, but
That's why you love rainbow.
I do. I love a rainbow. But definitely, I will say Joan Collins' clothes were iconic. Power suit,
Yeah.
power colors, and the hats.
The
But
accessories.
a little sidebar to the fashion is Dynasty. And again, I was only like 11 or 12 at the time. I don't remember if like products for a show were a big thing, but for Dynasty, it was. There was Carrington cologne for men
Oh yeah.
and Crystal perfume for women. In one year for Mother's Day and for Father's Day, it was like on sale at the Eckerd's drugstore by our house, and I had like saved my money because it was probably like $4.99 because it was like a drugstore perfume. It
Right.
wasn't like at the department store because I could walk to an Eckerd's and go buy it and save quarters or $1, whatever.
Low Eckarts.
And I remember getting those for my parents for Mother's Day and Father's Day. And my dad was always just super sweet. My mom was like, why did you get this for me? She wasn't really super into perfume and things like that. But my dad loved that Carrington cologne. I
Aw.
mean, he wore it and always wanted it. So I have a very distinct memory of buying that for them. Because again, I'm going to tell, everyone can post and say, yeah, they had all kinds of products, but those were the ones I definitely remember that were named after characters on a show.
I've just been sitting here like they didn't have Alexis air freshener.
I mean, they might have. I just knew the Crystal
And Carrington cologne. I was just trying to think of like
yes.
Alexis apples.
Alexis.
All right, so let's talk about. We've been talking about the show. Let's talk about the actual pilot.
Okay. That's good.
So it was about 2.5 hours, about 2 hours and 15 minutes.
All right, but we're gonna do a condensed version.
I am getting so good at condensing these summaries.
Yes.
After Suits, I've learned my lesson. Okay.
All right, let's do it.
All right, so we've said the names. We'll just go ahead and say them again. The pilot opens up and it's Crystal Jennings.
Crystal Jennings
is her. I know.
Gigi had to be watching this while she was incubating Sarah. So.
All right, Crystal Jennings is getting married. She is marrying her former boss, I guess, would be Blake Carrington because she was his secretary. They're getting married in a few days. Shortly before the wedding, this is all connected, geologist Matthew Blaisdell has been in the Middle East working on one of Blake's oil rigs. He's finally returning to Denver, which is where the show is set. He's been gone for about a year and a half, and while on the plane, he runs into, I guess when he's on this plane, I guess he's with a lot of other people from Carrington.
Company.
Yeah, from the company.
From Denver Carrington.
He runs into Steven, who is Blake's son. Steven is schmammered. He is white boy wasted.
White boy wasted.
And he insists Matthew come and sit with him in first class. He's being kind of a typical obnoxious
rich boy,
and Matthew agrees, and he comes up to first class. We got to talk about that airplane layout. How that airplane,
oh my gosh.
It
was like a living room.
I was sitting here being like, okay, this is so, yeah, it looked like a living room. It just looked like a bunch of double seat recliners. And so I'm like, okay, first class airplane. I went and Googled it. It was not too far off from how it actually looked. So if y'all haven't seen it, like go and Google image search it. It is insane. It looks like a bachelor pad. Like it looks like I don't want to say skeezy. It looks like a lounge of some kind.
Like
because back then going on an airplane, you got dressed up, you put on your suit, you put on your makeup. It was an event. Like
I took my first flight in 1980. I remember dressing up for it.
All right, so Steven and Matthew are sitting in first class. Steven's telling Matthew he's returning home for his dad's wedding. Matthew is unaware that Blake is getting remarried. I mean, why should he know? He's been working in the Middle East. Steven begins to imply that Matthew's probably not going to he's not going to like who Blake is marrying because him and Crystal apparently were in a relationship before he left for the Middle East, and Blake I guess Blake kind of swooped in and took Crystal while Matthew was gone.
Yeah.
And yeah, turns out, so they dated. So Matthew returns home to Denver. He reports back to Blake. Of course, he runs into Crystal right when he comes back. Matthew feels like it was intentional, that like Blake really set it up to where they would run into each other just so they would kind of have to have this confrontation because, I mean, she's about to get married. Immediately we notice that like there's still something there between Matthew and Crystal. Yeah. I mean, like their eyes meet and it's like, of course they haven't seen each other a year and a half.
Oh my God.
Very, very dramatic, of course. Yeah. All right, yeah. So Fallon. Okay, so yeah. Steven, Blake's son, is returning home. Blake's other child, Fallon, his only daughter, is also returning home for the wedding. You can kind of tell that like she's not really into her dad getting remarried, not for any specific reason other than like you're taking attention away from me. I'm sure that's what it has a lot to do with, or I'm just gonna be a brat about it.
That and, Crystal was the secretary. She probably thinks it's beneath him. I mean,
right,
lots of reasons.
Marrying a quote-unquote common person. I'm putting that in quotes because I don't agree with that. So, yeah, they're Fallon and Blake are kind of talking in Blake's limo, and he's just, like, kind of pushing her, you need to get married, you need to have a kid so we can continue this Carrington bloodline. And she's just like, you have a son. Like, what do you need me for? I mean, in all honesty, I mean, like, because she does not seem interested in getting married and having kids. He's just like, he kind of, I don't remember what Blake says in response to that, but he kind of gives like an ominous answer, like that's out of the question, in reference to Steven. So you're not really sure what's
Why?
going on. So you
Right.
kind of notice that like when Steven sees his dad, there's some like coldness between them.
Oh,
You're
yeah.
not really sure what's going on. You're something definitely has happened, and you're of course you're gonna find out later. Uh, so in kind of after all of this, you kind of come to find out that Fallon is having a secret affair with Blake's limo driver. I believe his name is
Oh,
his name is Michael.
Michael.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're having an affair. I think Steven kind of spots it immediately. He kind of sees them hooking up. Um, so then, where are we now? Oh, yeah, Matthew gets a visit. Matthew Blaisdell, the one that returned from the Middle East. There's Matthew and Michael, so I'm going to try to.
I know, lots of similar names.
Yeah, so it gets a visit from his old friend, Walter Lankershim, who asks him for money to help with his business. He's kind of like an independent oil person who's trying to make his fortune. He kind of has a rig on loan from Carrington, so he is kind of like, I need money to kind of like pay this off, so he doesn't come and take my oil rig away. So then they kind of have this conversation, and then Matthew's like, I don't have time to talk about this. I got my own stuff to deal with. He goes and picks up his daughter, Claudia. Is it Claudia?
Lindsay.
Lindsay, sorry, I was looking at
His
the wife's name.
Claudia.
They're going to pick up their. So yeah, Lindsay hasn't seen her dad in a year and a half. Turns out she hasn't really seen her mom in a year and a half either, because her mom had some type of mental breakdown a year and a half ago and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. And upon Matthew's return, they're going to pick Claudia up, his wife, from the psychiatric unit. So you're kind of starting to like link stuff together.
This
and you're
is
like,
all like a big mess.
so you're like, okay, Matthew, okay, you should see my face right now.
There's Blake.
Carry the two, yeah, okay,
Exactly.
like. So Matthew,
Multiply by
okay,
4.
so Matthew and almost said Kristen. Matthew and Crystal were in a relationship. Matthew was married, so Matthew was having an affair with Crystal. We are to guess that Claudia, Matthew's wife, found out about this, had a mental breakdown. He threw her in a psychiatric unit and then said, all right, I'm going to the Middle East.
I'm going to the Middle East.
Bye, daughter. And
while that's happening, Crystal decides to hook up with Blake, her boss.
Yeah.
So she's having
a double affair
on the dude that she was having an affair with.
So she was having an affair with a married man, and then while her married boyfriend was overseas, she leaves him for her boss. If this isn't primetime soap opera
pilot to launch,
yeah.
I mean, this is it.
All right, I'm glad we have that. All right, so a little bit later, Matthew and Crystal have this very dramatic rendezvous by a cliffside, because that's what people do.
They're in the mountains, Jeff.
Yep.
Actually, you're wearing my Denver shirt.
I am wearing a Denver shirt, and I didn't even realize
I know.
it.
I was gonna surprise you.
I mean, I have
that.
like 3 or 4 of these, but
right.
I love them. They're so
I went to
comfortable.
a conference a couple years ago in Denver for work, and I brought him a shirt back, and he's wearing it, and he didn't even realize it.
Did not even realize
I
it.
was gonna spring that on you.
So-
Surprise. Okay.
So Crystal is having doubts about marrying Blake. She already, I mean, like you said a little bit earlier, she's already like, she's not even married to him yet, and she's already like not seeing her friends anymore. She's already like feeling like she's separated from everyone, and she feels as if Blake isn't marrying her because he loves her, even though I have my own thoughts about that. But like it just seems like she doesn't want to marry Blake. I mean, straight up, I think Matthew has nothing to do with it. I think Matthew is an excuse. I just don't think she wants to marry Blake, because any interaction that she's had with Blake throughout the entire episode, it's her just being like, why are we getting married? Like, she's not literally saying that, but I mean, like,
she kind of is. She's like, my friends, like,
I don't see them anymore.
I don't see them anymore. She was depressed at her wedding shower. I mean, it was like she was miserable. It was like it was, because I'm actually kind of intrigued because I was thinking about it, like, so when Matthew goes off to the Middle East, because they were still together
Yeah.
before he left, that's why he put Claudia in the psychiatric ward. All of a sudden she's like, "Oh, hi Blake." Like that was her
Yeah.
boss. So I don't know. It just all seemed very weird. But of course, this is a primetime network TV show.
Right.
So, I mean, it's par for the course.
Yeah, so Crystal's having doubts, and she's kind of suggesting to Matthew that maybe they can start over, and Matthew's like, I got enough on my plate. I mean, and like, because a lot of the, we're not like getting too specific into it, but like, there's this kind of whole thing that's going on with Matthew's daughter, because she is just having, I mean, and with good reason, she's having a really tough time kind of adjusting to not just one of her parents being back in her life, but both of her parents being back in her life, and her mom still not being completely okay. You can kind of tell she's like, the Claudia's kind of spacing out, and she's kind of like not engaging that much. And I think, I think Matthew's just like, it really seems like he wants to kind of fix his mistakes and be like, I made a mistake. I ruined this family, and then I left. So it's very clear that he wants to try to rebuild his family. And so he basically, I mean, like, I know it's really mean, but the best way to tell someone to kind of get someone to not want to be with you is be like, I don't love you. Like, and that's pretty much, I mean, pretty much that's what he said. I mean, he was just like, he told Crystal, he's like, I don't love you. So stop trying to make this something. You're about to get married. I just got back with my wife. Let's not I don't want to ruin what I have, but Crystal's totally fine with ruining what she has. I mean, it seems like if Matthew would have said yes, she would have canceled that wedding absolutely in a heartbeat.
Gotcha.
All right, so Matthew does decide to work with Walter on the oil rig. There's an equipment malfunction, which leads to a bunch of people getting hurt. And, Matthew insists, he's just like, no, we set that up. We are professionals. I didn't mess this up. Like, it had to have been messed with. It had to have been sabotaged. So, of course, Matthew suspects Blake.
Well, Blake did say earlier in the episode of something about his plane crashing, so it's not like he hasn't had thoughts about it or, wanting to get rid of Matthew.
So we cut back to the Carrington house, and Steven, I don't know if it's specifically about the oil rig. I think it might just be like a general conversation that Steven is having with his dad. Steven really kind of questions his dad's, like, moral compass, his, like, ethics as, like, a businessman and stuff like that. And I mean, Blake just kind of hits beyond below the belt and just makes a comment. He's just like, well, you wouldn't understand. Basically telling him, like, you wouldn't understand because you're gay. So that's when you find out, which I am just repeating what was said on the show. So we find out that, I guess, Blake stumbled upon Steven having a relationship with another man in New York. So I don't know if he, like, saw them hooking up, or if he, like, saw, like, a paparazzi picture, some type of...
And I think this is what I mean when I say when I was 11, 12, as I was watching this for the first time. Like, I didn't get that. Like, I didn't understand what was actually happening. I mean, throughout the series, I started to understand what being gay was, what was homosexual, because he does end up having a partner on the show.
Okay.
And there's a lot that goes on with even that throughout the series.
Yeah.
But I think as we were watching the pilot, I mean, I think we were both startled by it.
Yes.
I mean, I think we were both, like, jolted.
I mean,
I was like,
we're not going to repeat the terminology that was used, but I mean, like,
yes,
it was...
for me, as just, like, thinking about the writers, I just was like, again, I guess I don't know what they were thinking, obviously, because we haven't talked to them, but it just seemed so just, like, out of place in the whole scheme of things. And I guess in Blake's mind, Steven's calling him unethical,
Mm-hmm.
immoral, and a bad businessman, and he is calling him out for his sexuality as a bad
he's
thing.
trying to imply that like because you're gay, you're already immoral. So
Right.
why are you judging
And
me? Which is
so,
the most ridiculous argument you can make. But I mean, like 1981.
right,
So
yeah, so it was, yeah, so looking back on that time, one, as, like I said, my age, I didn't understand that. And again, I think it also, I will say, as the series moved on, I think I became an ally really maybe because of this, because I was very like, intrigued by
hmm
his storyline throughout the several years that I watched it, because there's some other stuff that happens with him along the
oh,
way.
okay.
So, he to me was kind of one of my favorite characters, and actors change along the way.
Right.
But yeah, that whole scene when we watched it just the other day, just
It was
like
a
it,
little
it was like I was just
yeah.
like total cringe. I
We
was
were kind of
upset.
sinking in. We were kind of
Yeah,
sinking in our seats a little bit because we were like, ugh.
yeah.
All right, so the wedding day has finally arrived. Of course, they're getting married at the mansion.
At the mansion,
Amongst the guests are it's our first introduction. I think our first official introduction to a Colby,
the
the
Colbys.
Colbys. We have Cecil Colby and his nephew Jeff. That's my name.
Oh, Jeff.
I don't know why I said that. Cecil owns Colby
Jeff Colby, just like
Jeff
Colby.
Colvin
Yes.
being
So
Colvin
close.
Co. Oil.
Colvin
Oh
Cole.
goodness. All right. He owns Colby Co. Oil. He's an oilman, like Blake, but I mean, much more successful, much richer, much richer. I'm sure, like, I'm sure when Blake and this guy Cecil have a conversation, Blake's like, "Oh, I just got this 10,000 square foot vacation home," and I could just hear Cecil being like, "Well, I got a 12,000 square foot vacation home." Like, it just seems like they have that type of,
Yeah.
like,
I'm gonna
pissing
throw my
contest
money
type of
around.
relationship. So yeah, so Jeff, Cecil's nephew, it's very obvious that he's into Fallon, and Blake and Cecil are probably really into the idea of Jeff and Fallon getting together because we can
Merge the families.
combine, yeah, and then we can be double rich.
It's kind of like a Romeo and Juliet of the day.
Right.
So, the Capulets and the Montagues.
Except the parents would encourage that. I think Blake would at least encourage them
Maybe,
being
yeah.
together just because of the status of it all. Yeah, but Fallon's not into it. She's not into any type of. He's probably too boring for her. He's a businessman. He's probably just like her dad. So she's not into it. She is very much more into apparently the Denver Broncos because those are the players
Oh
that
my
show up, and each of them just start making out with her
Like,
in front of Crystal. Crystal's just like just kind
it
kind of being
was
like,
just hilarious.
that was
It
actually a
great.
really funny part. They
The
were all
receiving line. Fallon was receiving them.
receiving something.
Mm.
Yeah, so Fallon's not interested in Jeff. She's interested in hooking up with Broncos and her dad's limo driver.
The limo driver again.
So she goes upstairs, I guess, to her room, and and Michael, the driver, is like in her bathtub,
The
I guess.
bathtub.
So like I don't know if they had already hooked up or if maybe this was just like their scene, but they kind of start having a conversation, and you kind of start figuring out that like Michael is probably blackmailing her, trying to get all of this, like, I hooked up with Fallon, like, if I'll tell everybody what we did unless you give me money. He doesn't say that, but they're kind of having this like joking conversation, and you kind of find out in it he's like, no, he's gonna try to extort you. So she basically like it's the most badass move. I mean, honestly, she dunks. I mean, she basically tries to drown him in the bathtub. I mean, doesn't try to. She wasn't gonna kill him.
She was, yeah.
She could have. But she like dunks his head underwater, and there's a split second where I'm like, is she gonna kill this dude? I was just like,
He's the driver.
I mean, they're gonna notice.
Yeah.
They have to go to the airport for the honeymoon. But yeah, so basically she lets him back up, and basically she's just like, if you try to blackmail me, I'm gonna kill you. Like,
right. Like,
I can find someone who can make you disappear. Like,
we have a big property, lots of oil rigs. Like,
Right.
we can dump you out in some land somewhere.
so Michael's just gonna go back to being the driver. He's no longer gonna be Fallon's boo. All right, so
Nope.
now we're outside the mansion. Wedding guests are seeing Blake and Crystal off. This is when Walter shows up and demands Blake, admit that like he sabotaged the oil rig. Blake denies it. Walter starts being more confrontational, so Blake six his guard dogs on him, and people are just watching this happen, and I'm just
Ramsay Bolton.
There's an entire there's an entire wedding party that's just watching this happen.
Exactly. That's where I was just like, no one is doing anything.
No one's gasping. I mean, like, a lot of Crystal's friends and family came, and those are normal middle class people, and they weren't freaking out about it at all.
Exactly. I was just like, what is happening here?
Matthew shows up. Matthew shows up and
saves Walter.
And he takes Walter's side, so Blake fires Matthew. And then they're all leaving, and then there's like this dramatic freeze frame on Crystal, like I'm sure a lot of their episodes do. To be continued. And that is Oil. That's the name of the episode. Oil. Oh, whew, all right. So we kind of talked a little bit about the controversial themes to this episode.
And there were actually more. So besides the Steven, there was also a scene, you were discussing it a little bit with the Colbys in the billiard room. That's
actually the scene that I was thinking of originally.
Yes, where she's talking about how minorities, people of different religious affiliations will not ever be on the board of Denver Carrington. Essentially, it is a white man's position, and everyone else, I mean, I'm not going to say there were tinges, sorry, people, of racism and bigotry.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was flat out in this episode. So I think both you and I were watching this because it initially sort of starts with, you think she's going to hook up with Cecil Colby. He's like flirting with her and like kind of talking about like, let's go somewhere. And she's like, no.
With Cecil or with Jeff?
Okay, I can't remember now. Okay. But anyway,
you're good.
I'm like, because she's like, no, I have the Denver Broncos to take care of in a little bit, but and the chauffeur. But yeah, that scene too. I mean, it just was flat out. But I mean, it wasn't because she was outing her dad. I mean, she was like, he's not going to let this happen.
It was said in a way that was very like matter of fact, and it was just very. I don't want to say alarm. It was alarming. I'll say alarming. It was very much like, and like I said, some of the terminology that is used is very dated, very offensive. I'm not even gonna say dated because that's almost like letting it off lightly.
Yeah.
And we don't get like super political about stuff. We're not like gonna get super deep into it, but it's really hard not to with something like this because it was so just in your face.
Yeah.
The racism and the homophobia and the bigotry just in general, the misogyny in general.
Oh yeah.
And it was done in a way that, I'm going to be honest, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Like, it was done in a way. It was done in a way that like there's a difference between something being dated and something being just outright offensive.
And that's where I was wondering, I'm like, why did the writers put this in?
Mm-hmm.
Like, even, I mean, I don't know, even if, I mean, here, Blake was marrying his freaking secretary. I mean, talk about, like, the person who you wouldn't think would be part of the family.
Who was having an affair with a married man.
And it was one of Blake's workers. So, I mean, it's, like, all delusional. So, yes, I mean, it's all wrong. But it just seemed very, like, odd to include. I mean, racism, bigotry, all of homophobia, all of it aside, it was just like, as usual, not necessary.
It felt very much like just controversy for the sake of controversy. Like, let's say the controversial thing. Let's try to be more controversial than Dallas. Let's try to be more controversial than this.
That was probably a lot of it.
Because the last episode we did, if you listen to all of our episodes in order, we did Little House on the Prairie, which had a lot to do with Native Americans, and it had a lot to do with maybe there's this dated way to look at Native Americans. But what Little House on the Prairie did was showed that as long as you treat people like humans, that they will reciprocate that, because you have Charles, and I know we're talking about another show, but I have a point. Charles Ingalls from Little House on the Prairie, and the chief, he showed the chief hospitality and was like, you're a human, I'm a human, let's be a community and let's like not try and kill each other. And what ended up happening was the chief was just like, you can stay on this land, we're not going to bother you, like you showed me kindness, I show you kindness. And it was the freaking U.S. government that kicked him out. Like,
Right.
it had nothing. You're thinking that it's going to be this big conflict with the Native Americans. You're going to have this big dated, cringy, offensive take on Native Americans, but it ended up being the Native Americans were
The
were
nice
the ones
ones.
that were trying to make peace, and it was the U.S. government officials that were being greedy and being kind of puffing their chest out for the sake of puffing their chest out. So what Dynasty did was it like it did like the opposite of that. It was like, okay, you're not really sure what's going on. You're not really sure what's going on, and then just out of nowhere, we're just gonna say a bunch of offensive stuff, and it's just like
Yeah,
it just did
exactly.
not make any sense to me. I know I know I just said it earlier, but it really just felt like controversy for the sake of controversy.
And probably something to like jack up ratings on
Yeah.
the pilot to try to do something because I again I have not watched Dallas probably since the 80s, late 70s, early 80s. I don't really remember anything like that happening.
Yeah.
And again, I didn't remember that on Dynasty. I mean, I did know about the homophobia because that's a big storyline throughout
Mhm.
um, the series, but I really don't remember anything like that on Dallas, to be
Right.
honest. I mean, someone can correct me if there were stuff like that,
I mean,
but
yeah.
that in the first episode definitely seemed very
Jarring. Yeah.
contrived and like let's throw everything and see what sticks.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what it was. That
Yeah.
now you just worded that perfectly because that's how it felt. Like let's think of every controversial thing we can think of and see what is going to show up like on the trailer. What's going to
Yeah,
show up on the stinger.
definitely.
All right, so I think we've kind of judged this pilot
Yeah.
pretty well.
I would not
Um,
watch Dynasty
no,
today
I would not. I would possibly start when Joan Collins joins the show
just to see that.
just to see because she's a legend. But yeah, this is usually the part where we say did this episode stand up? Does the show stand up? You can very easily tell by what we've talked about for however many minutes. It did not stand up very well. This is not a show that I would be watching. If this aired today, it wouldn't. I mean, first of
Well,
all, it
no,
wouldn't.
right.
And I'm glad for that. But like, it just, yeah, I just can't see my. It was interesting. I mean, like, it was interesting. It it was interesting enough to where I would maybe start watching, but like just the pilot alone. After that, I was just like, yeah, I would just rather skip
Yeah,
to
I think
season
I
two.
like want to take you to when Joan Collins
And
appears
Heather Locklear joined
and
the
Heather
show. Yeah,
Locklear
like so,
kind of
and also the a dynasty that I'm more familiar with. I think
yeah.
that would also be it. So, if Dynasty is a show that you remember really loving, we're not saying that it's a bad show. Oh, I am saying it's a bad show, but like it did not stand the test of time. It is very, very poorly dated, but it is it is Dynasty. I mean, like it's just it's its own thing,
Yeah.
and
It was
it's
iconic for fashion, I
right.
think. I think it was iconic for the cat fights. I think it was iconic for
If memes existed back then,
oh,
it would
yeah.
be the perfect meme
Yeah.
show.
I mean I think there were some things that maybe it helped in the sense of like it was a female driven
Yeah.
show. A lot of women, famous people came on it, but again for those initial storylines, it was very hard to watch.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, so I think that about wraps it up. All right, thanks for tuning in. If you haven't already, go ahead and follow us on whichever platform you're listening to this podcast on. That way, you'll be notified every time we publish a new episode. You can also follow us on Instagram at We Judge Pilot. You can leave us a comment, suggest a show for us to watch, or you can leave some emojis in the comment. Anna, my emoji queen, queen of emojis, what do you got for me?
I'm gonna say the mountain for
For Denver.
Denver.
Mm-hmm.
The hat emoji.
Yes.
I mean, we haven't seen Alexis yet, but you got to. A diamond for Crystal.
Of course.
The secretary emoji for Crystal. The fuel, because, oil and all of
Mhm.
that. I will also say the cat for cat fights.
That's a good
And
one.
something we didn't really talk about real quick, like one night Crystal and Blake are having a
We didn't talk
date
about that. Yeah, yeah.
and they're on their plane. That's why we were talking about the planes and having like all these vehicles. He asks her what kind of food she wants to eat tonight, what ethnicity of food, and she says she wants Chinese food. So they go to San Francisco, go to Chinatown. So the Chinese food takeout box. So those are my emojis for
All
this
right.
episode.
All right. Well, we're going to head out, but we'll talk to you soon.
Bye. Thanks for listening.